We open to a rare example of the reset button not having been hammered like a particularly stubborn nail, as Voyager still has some of those Borg upgrades on it. As Chakotay said in the last episode that removing them would only take a couple of weeks, we're presumably still inside Borg space. Which makes it odd that we're only travelling at impulse rather than warp, but maybe I'm overthinking it. Instead, we're visiting our newest guest in the cargo bay. Seven is plugged into a charging port while the doc informs us that her biological functions are restarting. This sounds good on the surface, and it would be, were it not for the collection of Borg tech scattered throughout her body, much of it suppressing or replacing those biological functions. This could be problematic, and Janeway thinks she ought to know about it, so we wake her up. Now, quite how they thought this would end, I'm not sure, but if you wake up somebody who's only known one way of living for their entire life and everything has changed, plus they're surrounded by people who they've been told are enemies, and then tell them that they need multiple invasive surgeries, I think it's fair to expect a poor response. Seven doesn't disappoint, losing her shit at no longer hearing the rest of the collective, then demanding to be returned to them. Failing that, she wants to be left somewhere with a beacon so they can come collect her, but that's not an option. Those implants are being rejected by an increasingly strong immune response, and she'd be dead before any Borg arrived to collect her. In fact, one of those implants is going to need removing right away before it falls out of her face. She's a bit distressed by this prospect, and the doc gives her some sleepy time juice so she can have a nap. In the sick bay, we're prepping for surgery, and the doc asks Kez to anesthetize Seven. Funny thing though, the hypospray jumps across the room into her hand. Seeing the surprise of the doctor and Tuvok, she tells them it wasn't a conscious effort, so it looks like her psychic shenanigans are playing silly buggers. Maybe talking to the number species has kick-started them somehow, as the doc says her brain shows similar activity as when she was in contact with them. We'll run some super scans later, as soon as we're done removing a bit of Seven's chrome. While they operate, Chakotay's updating Janeway on our progress. Removing the Borg components from our ship is slow going, and it's also asked up our warp capability, which is why we're travelling at impulse, answering my earlier observation. Getting that fixed is our top priority, as we're not out of Borg territory yet, and we've detected the trail of cubes that passed by a few days ago. It'd go a lot quicker if we could use our resident Borg expert, says Janeway, a suggestion scoffed at by Chakotay. She's undeterred, thinking she may be able to reach Seven's humanity, and, to that end, has been researching her in our database. Apparently, Seven, whose pre-assimilation name was Annika Hansen, was on a ship with her parents when they decided to do some exploring. Unfortunately, their idea of exploring was to point in a direction and see what's over there, and the direction they chose was the Delta Quadrant. Their ship wasn't heard from after it set out, and given that this was some 20 years ago, it's possible they became the first human Borg. Of course, that means the Borg are all she's ever really known, and adapting to a life outside it may not be possible, but Janeway intends to try. If she gets the chance anyway. The doctor calls and tells her that there have been some problems with Seven, so off we go to sickbay. The re-establishing of Seven's immune system has accelerated rapidly. To save her, the doc believes we'll have to remove the majority of her implants. Interestingly, this raises an ethical issue for him and Janeway. They're aware this would be against her wishes, and that knowledge butts up against a patient's right to refuse treatment. This would have been a good opportunity for us to have a discussion about her past being essentially comparable to indoctrination, meaning her current frame of mind is not focused on her own desires, but those of the collective. A shame then that we choose not to, with Janeway essentially saying she's with her own kind now, so we have to save her, and ordering the surgery to go ahead. We begin, only to be stopped almost immediately as Seven's body goes into a state of shock. As the doctor desperately tries to find out why, Kez again uses her psychic shenanigans to see inside Seven's brain, similar to how she was able to see on a subatomic level in the episode Cold Fire. She finds an implant and tells the doc about it, then goes one better and disables it too. I'd question the health benefits of having a free-roaming spiky thing inside your brain, but the doc doesn't seem bothered, so I'm sure it's fine. Kez is congratulated by the doctor, though she seems somewhat disconnected from the situation. The doc is updating Janeway on his progress with removing or replacing Seven's implants. While she's there, she has a chance to catch up with Kez and see how those new shenanigans are coming along. For her own part, Kez seems to be enjoying them greatly and is feeling a sense of exhilaration, not just mentally but physically too. Janeway's happy for her, though Tuvok urges caution and a regimen of instructed meditations with her to find out how deep the psychic rabbit hole goes. They trot off to do that while the Doc wakes Seven for a chat with Janeway. Naturally, she's still a bit upset at being removed from the collective, demanding a return of the other voices in her head. Janeway offers her a chance to join Voyager's crew and be part of a group here, explaining their issues with the Borg modifications and saying she's needed. This doesn't get much of a response, so Janeway enters into very questionable ethical territory again by ending the conversation with, "You must comply." To engineering then, where Janeway tells them that she's asked Seven to help us, which is a rather generous interpretation of what just happened. There's a little friction at the prospect of working with her, but not quite as much as you'd expect, based on letting a former enemy fiddle with Voyager's gubbins. She's sent into a Jeffries tube to unborg it. While she's doing that, Tuvok is meditating with Kez. He wants Kez to do some psychic shenanigans on a subatomic level, which is pretty fucking ballsy considering how that turned out for him last time. She manages to affect the flame without boiling his face again, which is certainly an improvement. Thing is, she thinks she can go deeper, beyond the subatomic and into the sub-subatomic, or swirly-whirly clown show level. She's delighted at altering the very structure of reality, though it's fair to say Tuvok is rather more reserved. Back in engineering, Seven seems fully compliant with helping get things fixed. Compliant doesn't necessarily mean sociable, a fact Kim learns when he tries to engage in small talk. He gives up shortly before Seven's robo-eye spots a communications gizmo. Seeing a chance, she twats Kim and uses the no to try and call her Borg mates. To be fair, were I facing the prospect of having to tolerate the inane banter of Harry Kim for the next 70 years, I'd seriously consider this too. The crew try to hurriedly stop her, but she's done science things to prevent it. One thing she hasn't accounted for is us having a resident member of the Psi Corps, and after feeling that something was wrong, she uses her swirly-whirly clown show powers to poop lightning at Seven, knocking her out. A little later we discover that Seven managed to get a partial signal out after all, maybe enough to tip off the Borg about our location. That's not all, as Kez's swirly-whirly clown show powers have had an adverse effect on the area around where Seven was disabled, weakening the structure. More of that could prove potentially dangerous to the ship itself. That'll have to wait as we talk things over with Seven. She tells Janeway that her conversion will fail, referring to her actions as an attempt at assimilation. Janeway explains that she's met former members of the Borg who, despite initial struggles, found ways of adapting to individuality, and that she believes Seven will do the same despite how long she spent in the collective. Seven rather delightfully raises the question of if, when her autonomy is judged as having been restored to her, she'd be permitted to rejoin the collective if that was what she wanted. It's a question Janeway dodges, doing her no favours in convincing Seven of her intentions, and she calls Janeway a hypocrite. The whole scene raises questions about how you deal with someone who wishes to perform an action you consider harmful, or even if you have the right to deal with that at all if they appear otherwise rational. And it's the sort of thing I'm here for. Points all round. In the mess hall, Neelix thinks it's time for a celebration over Kez's progress. After a little bittersweet exchange about the end of their relationship, which goes some way to redeeming Neelix by him not pushing anything, the conversation turns to her new abilities. A small demonstration gets a bit out of hand and Neelix asks her to stop. She's hesitant, seeming to want or perhaps need this, and the wibbly in the table knocks Neelix's stunt double on his arse. That's enough for her to stop, but she falls over too. On the bridge we detect some strange shit going on, causing Janeway and Tuvok to come and take a look. They discover Kez is in the middle of getting raptured, but it doesn't take, and she has a nap instead. The doc tells us that her brain is going turbo, though we're not quite sure why. The rapture we saw was her body breaking down into component elements, but then it decided not to. Again, we're not sure why. As if that wasn't bad enough, it could also take a chunk of the ship with it, so we'd best figure it out, and soon. Seven's getting a bit antsy in the brig, and Janeway pops down to see what's going on, discovering that she's struggling to adapt to solitude. As an aside, now that I think about it, this makes her imprisonment with no company a form of torture. Leaving her in a silent room serves to amplify the silence in her head, a constant reminder of her loss. The compassionate option would have been having someone try to actively engage with her. even if it meant only providing a voice as a distraction. But again, I digress. Looks like we're going to try that engagement now, as Janeway shows her a picture of her younger self and the limited data we have on her. The response is aggression, a denial of who she was in favour of who she became. But that logic is flawed. 7 of 9 tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix 01 isn't who she became. It's who she was turned into by others, and her ability to accept that violation, that abuse, for what it is, will take time. Time also is at the heart of Janeway's conversation with Kaz. Kaz believes that hers has come to an end, at least here with the crew of Voyager. Exploring what she's becoming is a danger to the ship, but she won't, or perhaps can't, choose to ignore it. Janeway pushes back, saying she's basing her decision on feelings and beliefs, but Kaz is adamant. It's her decision. Her fears of how the Doctor will react to the news are pushed to one side when the rapture begins again. Janeway calls for a shuttle to be prepared and we rush to the bay. Kaz's ascension is damaging the hull and preventing teleportation, so we'd best get a move on before rapture ruptures kill everyone. Tuvok meets them and tries to lend his mental discipline so she can delay the change. It's a short-term solution and we hurry to the shuttle and launch. Kaz calls and provides them a gift. Her transformation accompanies Voyager's engines coming online and accelerating to speeds beyond their capacity. When it's over, they've travelled nearly 10,000 light-years. She's placed them 10 years closer to home, and perhaps more importantly, beyond Borg space. Speaking of which, time to introduce the new lycra-clad version of 7, complete with high heels, which I'm sure wouldn't be any problem to walk in at all after never having worn them before. The Doc tells us he arranged her wardrobe, so perhaps medicine in the future has managed to bypass all of the musculoskeletal issues associated with them in our time. Regardless, 7 seems rather more cooperative now, stating that attempts to contact the Borg will not happen again. I guess that acceptance I mentioned earlier won't take time after all. Perhaps she assimilated a psychotherapist or something. Maybe that'll prove useful for others in dealing with the loss of Kaz, and we watch Tuvok place the meditation lamp in his window as we fly away. The portrayal of 7 as someone entirely unaccustomed to life outside of the collective is reminiscent of the difficulties faced by ex-cult members who try to adapt to their new reality. This may not be entirely coincidental, as the 90s featured a number of high-profile cult news stories in America. The mass suicide of Heaven's Gate, for example, was just a year before this story was written and demonstrates the power of indoctrination into groupthink. Her claim that they should have let her die rather than remove her adheres to this. There's crossover too with how her behaviour mirrors addiction. When 7 expresses dismay at being separated from the collective, Janeway offers her a hive of a sort with them on Voyager. Depending on your point of view, this is either a form of manipulation to ensure compliance, or an attempt to wean her off the need for external control slowly by offering a less harmful substitute, in the same way that methadone is used to treat heroin withdrawal. It's a deep and complicated basis for the character, one that begs the chance to examine her slow recovery. We should need to deal with the difficult, harrowing journey of someone for whom the term deprogramming is perfectly apt. Which is why it's so disappointing that she goes from existential crisis to, oh, she's fine now. I get that spending the next 3 or 4 episodes watching a sweat-soaked 7 rocking back and forth as she craves her fix of collective probably wouldn't make good family TV, but to simply switch it off entirely does the character a disservice. She's been removed from everything she knows, and the result of that should be messy and confusing. 2 scenes in the brig simply don't do that justice. Another example, then, of what we lost when Voyager was forced into the episodic pigeonhole. End of episode. Look, I know you're only here for Space Dog, but occasionally we have to do a bit of admin, and this is one of those. If you are a member of the channel's Patreon at the time this video goes live, please go check your messages. Again, if you were a patron before 1745 British Summertime on Tuesday, April 11th, 2023, please go check your messages. I'm going to be and I need your response in order to know what to put on.